Joe Biden visits Emmanuel AME Church to pander for the black vote for 2024. And all the internet grew strangely silent about Christian nationalism.
But the people are retarded.
What happened to Rob Reiner's new scathing documentary about the separation of church and state? Where are progressive Christians crying their eyes out that religion is combining with politics when Joe Biden does it? The only way to solve this is with a debate on the subject. And we'll look at a fascinating one today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And most importantly, if you're a fan of the show, if this show has been beneficial to you in any way, please go one step further. It's easy to like, it's easy to share, it's easy to subscribe, but maybe one thing that demands a little bit more of you is to give. And we humbly ask that you would consider Indie Thinker as a place where your tax-deductible donations could go. Now, not only because of the great things that we've done in the past, not only because you want to continue what we're doing here on the show, but also because of the great things we have in store in the future. In fact, we are right now in the early stages of preparing a documentary on the epidemic of fatherlessness here in America. I believe it is one of the linchpin issues of our time, and if we can solve that, we can solve so many other issues. And like I said, we're in the early stages of pre-production on this documentary, and you can help us get to the finish line. For those who give a donation, we are allowing you free access to our introductory sizzle reel trailer. So you can see the trailer, you'll see some familiar faces, not only including mine, but also some other big names out there who are helping us put this film together. If you want to see that trailer, then please do us a big favor. Everyone who gives today will have free access to that trailer so that you can see where your money is going. And trust me, it's going to not only support this channel and what we've done in the present, but also to expand well beyond that to make a difference in our world. So you can go to the link on the screen or to the description of this podcast where you can give your tax-deductible donation today. In 2004, Guillermo Gonzalez wrote the book Privileged Planet. In it, there's some fascinating arguments throughout, but it ultimately ends with the conclusion that based upon how much fine-tuning took place on our planet for there to be life, it necessitates that we believe that there is a designer behind it. Now, for those of you who have listened to the mainstream narrative, you will quickly mock that without even touching the book, which I would say is intellectually dishonest to say the least. However, for those who are a little bit more open-minded and willing to think for themselves, I would hope that you would be willing to consider the arguments that are made in that book. Now, what you won't find very surprising, probably, is that the intellectual community, the people at Iowa State University, where Guillermo Gonzalez was a professor on his way to being tenured, well, they didn't like the book very much, and it was highly derided by these people who do not practice viewpoint discrimination at all. And I can prove it to you. Not only from emails that were released from his colleagues, like this one by Dr. Bruce Harmon, that says, "Would have thought that an intelligent person would have at least kept quiet until after tenure. He will be up for tenure next year, and if he keeps up, it might be a hard sell to the department, but maybe not so difficult for his lawyers, who will certainly be retained by the Discovery Institute." The Discovery Institute, of course, is a group of intelligent design scientists, and you should also take note of the fact that right there in that one email you heard a professor critique freedom of association and freedom of speech. Now, you should also know that there was a statement released in 2005, just a year after the book was published, from Iowa State University Science Department, in which the professors were asked to sign off on a declaration that they do not posit anything close to intelligent design. Now, of course, those who came up with this statement said, this has nothing to do with Guillermo Gonzalez's book on intelligent design. We just feel like we should come out right now, shortly after it was published, and make this statement. And then you should also know, shortly after the book was published, Guillermo Gonzalez was denied tenure by Iowa State University. Now, I could go on and give you story after story after story of other Christians who have also been ostracized from their positions of influence and their jobs simply because they're Christians. It isn't too hard to posit a world in which the academy is absolutely overrun with progressive ideology and indoctrinating students to one side of the aisle. In all, I hope we can take away at least this assessment, that The academy today has no problem with Christians being professors and being even tenured. That is, unless they become vocal about their faith. They are perfectly fine with quiet Christians, but the moment they start to actually speak out in an authoritative manner on their faith, well, then that is too much to handle. That's why today I think it's important for us to have a conversation about Christian nationalism. Is Christian nationalism just simply an ad hominem attack for vocal Christians, or is there something more to it? Is it the fascist wing of a religious ideology that is trying to overtake America? In order to answer that question, I think it's important to hear debate from Milo Yiannopoulos and Destiny on the subject. Check it out.
How dare you show up here offering anything but sympathy? It's outside the scope of our evening this evening to prove or disprove the truth of Christianity or Christ or whatever. But I'll make a few points. There is no America without Christ. And the reason for that is that this is an intrinsically and fundamentally Christian nationalist country, by which we mean it's built into the architecture of the nation. There's no getting away from it. You can lie about it. You can pridefully claim that, you can be good people without Christ. You can't. You're just inheriting a system of good and evil from the culture in which you grew up, which accords with the natural law. America was founded, as Adams told us, with a constitution that is wholly unsuited to the governance of anyone but a moral and religious people. Do you think that America is comprised of a moral and religious people today? Obviously it is not. And what he meant specifically was Christianity, because the way that America is set up outsources morality to Christianity. And without it, it doesn't work. Because jury trials don't work when people vote with race instead of conscience. Everything in America presupposes the legal system, the social system, the government. Everything in America presupposes the existence of the Judeo-Christian God. Without that, it all comes tumbling down. And without that, it is coming tumbling down. And without that, we're not able to give people who have terrible sicknesses and weaknesses and defects the help that they need. Instead, we hand them victimhood scripts, and they shoot up schools, they shoot up churches, whether they are young white guys on antidepressants, or whether they're transgender people who are told that it's white Christians are responsible for all of their miseries. It is Christianity that keeps us nice to each other, that keeps us being good to one another. And if you toss it out, as happened in 1776 here, you have a really big problem on your hands because, and I'm going to say something very radical and difficult to say in Tennessee of all places, there are freedoms afforded to Americans that are too radical and too great and too daring without the insulation of Christianity. The First and Second Amendments don't work unless everyone's Christian. They don't work, and they're not working. They're not functioning. You can't give crazy atheists guns. You can't let shameless liars say whatever they want about other people in public without consequence. There's a sort of unwritten rule that sits behind everything in America. And it is that these are all the things you get to do because we know that you can handle it. We know that you can be trusted with this because you love God, because you respect life, because you won't take other people's lives, because you'll keep your word. Without that, the First and Second Amendments become a sort of license to abuse one another or to kill one another. They become a license to lie. They become a license to murder. They become too much freedom, because there is such a thing. And without an underpinning moral architecture, this country doesn't work. And it's not working. And since this country has fallen away from God, the Christian God, this country has begun to fall apart. And that's why all of this terrible shit is happening. That's why all the awful stuff on TV is going on. It's why you can no longer trust people to keep their words if you don't know them. It's why everybody keeps voting with their skin color or their sexuality or gender or whatever bollocks it is today. Because they're not unified under Christ, because they're not one under Christ, because they're not brothers and sisters in Christ. It doesn't matter if you agree with the literal truth of Christianity or not. The founders did, and they made a country for people who did. And if you don't agree with that, or you don't like God, or you don't see why too much freedom is leading us all to hate and kill each other, and you don't appreciate that we should not only restore Christianity in culture, but require it in public life. You should go to Canada. You should go somewhere else where there's a moral architecture built into the law. But here, it doesn't work without God. And when you don't have him, when instead people replace prayer and the rituals of the church with antidepressants, with compound interest, with games and drink and drugs and fornication, kind of thing he does with his wife, offering her around town like she's common property. America doesn't work when we behave that way, because we'll all just end up murdering each other.
Now, throughout right there from Milo, you heard some really fascinating arguments, in my opinion, and I'm not saying that simply because I'm a Christian or because I believe the Bible is true or that Jesus is who he says he is. I'm saying this simply from a logical perspective. In order for a functioning society to truly work, there needs to be a limiting principle on basically everything. Let me give you an example. Freedom is not freedom if there is no limiting principle upon freedom. There needs to be limits to freedom. So you can't be free to go kill whoever you want to just because they make you angry or cut you off in traffic. There is a limit to your freedom. You take matters into your own hands and you will find yourself quickly in a jail cell. You shouldn't be able to abuse children just because they are pesky and they walk on your lawn. There should be a limiting principle to our freedoms so that we are not going around and changing our freedom into anarchy. And historically speaking, in our country, whether you like it or not, the limiting principle that has been placed upon things like freedom and other ideas in America has been the Judeo-Christian ethic. Christian morality and values has been the limiting principle to keep us as a society held together. Now, I can't help but see that there is a communist / Marxist / postmodern kind of ideology causing us to totally throw those past Christian moral virtues to the side and trying to posit something else in their place, and they are not working. And this is where John Adams's quote comes in, and Milo kind of referenced it, that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people, and it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. In order for America to work, it presupposes Christian values. Now, you may disagree with that. You may hate Christian values, but you're going to have to posit something else in its place. And that's where we truly have America at its finest, when it's working like it's supposed to. Fine. If you don't think Christian morality and values should be the limiting principle upon a society, well then do your best. Step to the plate and posit what limiting principle should be instituted. And if you can't come up with anything better, then maybe you should just go back to the dugout and be quiet. So ultimately, it's a question of what is the limiting principle in society? What can we truly posit as a means by which we do not harm others? I mean, it used to be the Hippocratic Oath for people in the medical community, and I'm not so sure anymore, especially as it pertains to transgender surgeries. Suffice to say, you will have to come up with a limiting principle. Let's see if Destiny has the goods to do it himself in this next clip.
Today, we've got viewers gathered from all across the world tuning in to a debate between me and Milo, where Milo is going to argue that we should turn the USA into an isolated, authoritarian, zealously religious country. I think that technology is the Pandora's box that has changed this country and this world forever, and I don't think we're ever going back to the days of public squares and mail service by horse. Cultural exchange is happening, whether you like it or not, quite literally at the speed of light. Even right now, potentially hundreds of thousands or even millions of people around the world are listening to me and Milo have this debate. The only way to stop this type of cultural exchange is through the militant authoritarianism that Milo is talking about on this stage. That might be through his being against the First Amendment, that might be against his taking away of the Second Amendment, and that might be through the institution of a state religion. This means the destruction of our freedom of speech, our ability to produce media, satire, and comedy, and our ability to communicate openly on the social media platforms we've all unfortunately grown addicted to. After Milo gets his way and abolishes the First Amendment, is he going to be the one deciding who we can or cannot make fun of on Twitter? Is the world really going to return to how it was before birth control, before women had the right to work, before gay people were allowed to get married, before we were allowed the ability to freely worship whatever God we wanted, or abstain from worship altogether? I reckon that we cannot close Pandora's box. Christian nationalism, as it stands today, isn't even a coherent ideology. Its proponents will argue whether there's an ethnic component, whether one needs to be Catholic or not, and whether one needs to even be a Christian or a supporter at all in order to idolize somebody for a Christian nationalist ideology. How many more porn stars does Donald Trump need to work his way through behind his wife's back before Christian nationalists stop worshiping him as their savior? As small as Christian nationalism is as a movement, even with it being as small as it is, there is still endless infighting. Anyone who's taken a gander recently at Milo, Ali Alexander, or Fuentes' Telegram account can attest to that. And now, with an already fractured and fighting minority movement, some want to put even more restrictions, such as race, lineage, sexuality, LGBT status, or geography, on who ought to be allowed to join their movement. The glory days of Christianity are largely over. While the number of worshippers have ebbed and flowed through time, it's impossible for us to return to where we came from. In 1999, almost 70% of Americans were part of a church, synagogue, or mosque. And just 20 years later, in 2020, according to Pew Research, that number has fallen to just 47%, a minority of the population for the first time in U.S. history. We need to be realistic about the coming years. We need to help our young men and women find purpose in the world, stop pretending like some Christian nationalism is the answer. We need to find ways to get our young people engaged with their friends, family, and their communities in ways that synergize with the technological explosion the entire world has experienced. If Christian nationalists want to continue to practice Christianity in America, then I say we let them. However, we should never allow them to take away our right not to do the same.
If the movement, such as it is, I didn't realize there was one, but if Christian nationalism is not yet adequately defined, it's because nobody used it before 2 years ago, which it seems to me to be perfectly reasonable. Trump is not a religious leader in any sense, and you're making a classic mistake of people who don't understand religion, don't understand God, and don't understand their own country when you say, hold Trump up as a kind of moral example. Render unto Caesar. We don't expect that our presidents should be like Jesus because they're not here to do Jesus' job. So, no. It's interesting you talk about women's rights. I mean, Christianity is the... Sorry, I mean... You know, I just don't know how hard to go in, really. I mean, you know, you're talking about the religion that gave women consent in marriage. You're talking about the religion that gave women the right to say no, that elevated them from chattel into human beings. You want to return women to chattel. You want women to be like your wife, passed around town. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to take moral lectures on the rights of women from somebody who treats supposedly their wife in what ought to be a holy sacrament as a communal sex toy. Give me a break. Give me a break. I'm not going to take moral lectures from somebody who, for all intents and purposes, may as well have a fleshlight instead of a wife, who demeans and besmirches her honor, who speaks about a woman who should be treated with the reverence and respect and love that we treat our own mothers with, like she was something you could buy, like she's something that just to get off with, passed around to other men while you watch, flicking yourself off. So forgive me if I decline to take any lectures from you on women's bloody rights. As for gay rights, no thanks. I didn't want them when I was having sex with men, and I don't want them now. Catholicism and Islam are growing, in case you aren't familiar with the world outside these borders. And the reason for that is that everybody sees what a bloody mess we're all in, thanks to globalization, thanks to the information economy, thanks to the kinds of changes that he says are inexorable, because, like a lot of undereducated people, he doesn't have much of a grasp of the world before he was born. I think if you were to glance a little further back, whether it were to ancient Greece, or Rome, or the Holy Roman Empire, you would see plenty of examples in history, or even, dare I say it, the Weimar Republic. A little bit closer to our own era, in which an era of rampant sexual degeneracy was indeed replaced by some quite stern social rules, to put it mildly. History is replete with examples of what happens when the public gets sick of people like you fucking everything up, breaking everything apart, and destroying all the things that make society precious, that make relationships work. In fact, if you are to look back in history as far as Greece and Rome, you might say that history is really the story of how people like you, given undue influence and larger platforms than they deserve, continually express views that are so far outside of the mainstream and so out of step with what ordinary people think that you have to be regularly slaughtered, and new governments have to be installed, and coups have to be engaged in, just to keep people like you in line, because otherwise we'd all be dead. So I'm sorry, but I'm certainly not going to take any kind of moral lectures from you on anything. But I've given you a few examples of why everything you just said is complete and absolute nonsense. But let me tell you, if your memory stretches back, and as you're at university, you're an educated person, it should be further than 1980. Yeah, you absolutely can put it back in the box. And we must, and we should, because otherwise America is done.
I'm fascinated by this kind of Pandora's box argument that we, because of our Christian virtues, somehow want to thrust the world back into the 1950s, and technology has exposed Christianity and shown how frivolous it is, and now we no longer need it anymore, because something akin to because we have like Facebook. Like, if anything, social media has proved how much we need Christianity. OnlyFans is not helping us like move into the 21st century with pride and with values and with morality. Technology in no way, in my mind, disproves Christianity. This seems to be nothing less than kind of an Enlightenment talking point. So you're going to ask yourself throughout this conversation, which is more likely? This blue-haired, very smart, and I'll give you that, very smart guy is absolutely right. Christians are a bunch of Luddites that want to thrust us back into the Middle Ages, or that technology actually necessitates that we have a deeper and more thoughtful conversation of morality, and that destiny is actually full of crap. Now, my biggest problem throughout this debate is that I find Milo, who is a provocateur to be sure, actually way more thoughtful throughout all of this debate, actually providing examples and digging in a little bit deeper than superficial kind of arguments to explain what he's talking about. And Milo actually cares about history a little bit here, whereas throughout, and I think this is a fair assessment, you can put down in the comment section below if you don't believe so, throughout, I feel like destiny is just merely saying things and then never defining his terms and then expecting these things to magically come out of nothing. So for instance, he constantly uses the word purpose and meaning, but does not ever give an argument from where purpose and meaning can come from a secular humanistic standpoint. And in our next clip, I think I'll show you why he can't argue that. So check it out.
I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to respond to. I think it's a little funny that apparently I'm so far outside of what people regularly think, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure I'm giving you a bigger audience than you've had in the past several years post your cancellation. But I see that this is what the dying throes, I guess, of an internet provocateur, as he self-described himself back when you were writing on the alt-right, then when you were writing on Trump. Now I guess you're not writing on guys anymore, because apparently you prayed away the gay. So whatever you're doing now. But I won't get into all that. I'll take the high road, despite the fact that you're one of the most obsessed with my wife's vagina gay guys I've ever seen in my entire life, which is very fucking weird, but very strange.
All right, Destiny.
I have the personality I have. Sort of stuck with it now.
Now your question, Destiny. You have 5 minutes to respond to this, and then I'll have 3 minutes to respond to that. Some would argue that a society without religion at its core would devolve into a nihilistic society, deprived of any meaning or purpose. How would you prevent, in your society, non-Christian nationalist governing society, from devolving into a nihilistic, meaningless society?
I think that you have to have something greater than yourself to live for, and I think religion is like a really easy package to give somebody that kind of solves for a lot of those problems. It gives you a nice guide for how to view the world, it gives you a nice guide for how to view your family, it gives you a nice guide for how to live an ethical life, and through that package, people feel like they have something greater than themselves to live for. I don't think it's impossible to have that thing without religion, but I think right now we're very politically fractured as a country, and it makes it really difficult for us to have those things. So for instance, there are certain topics that are hotly contested that I I don't think should be. So for instance, all of us should be able to say we're proud to be Americans. That includes progressives, that includes BLM people, that includes people on the left, it includes anybody that might, however far left you go, you should be able to say that. That shouldn't be ground that we cede to people on the right. I think it's kind of a shame that if you see an American flag on somebody's car today, you basically know that they're a conservative because nobody on the left would put that on their car. I think that's an insane proposition. So I think that when we've gotten to this point to where we're so politically divided that people can't even feel proud of their country anymore, if you also take away religion from those people too, then they're kind of aimlessly, I guess, wandering from Twitter to Facebook to YouTube to whatever, just endlessly shitting on each other with no common united purpose. So I think that one of the things we need to work on more than anything else is kind of healing some of the political fracture that exists in this country. I think it's good that we argue with each other, but it's not good that we are relentlessly banning people from every platform so that we're all kind of like gathering in different areas and we're not even able to have conversations with each other in the same reality anymore.
Isn't endlessly careening from one person to the other, shitting on each other, what you do for a living? For lemons, for handouts. There aren't good societies unless people agree on a common set of values. And I'm afraid that freedom, democracy, and the American dream haven't cut it, have they? You don't need to really be a Christian. I'm certainly not going to attempt to persuade anybody this evening. I'm not in the business of evangelization. I quite like that about Judaism, actually. It's like, no, we don't want you. But that's not the Christian way. So. But just look at the societies that Christians build. I mean, earlier he says, you get rid of the First Amendment, and there goes satire. Again, apparently a memory that doesn't stretch back before 1980. Because I think most of the best satirists were Christian Europeans, weren't they? And before that, they were pagans. And, we live in a very Hellenistic kind of inheritance, and it was just complete and total bollocks. And you've been doing a lot of complete and total bollocks, assigning positions to me that I don't hold, and saying, he wants to murder everyone, he wants to kill all the blacks. No. Look at the societies that Christians build. Look at the things they build. In Catholic theology, there's a thing called the transcendentals, and it's supposedly the things that all souls have in common, that all people yearn for, and which brings us closer to an understanding of God. Now, opinions differ on how many of these things there are, but the core three that everyone agrees on is beauty, truth, and goodness. And it seems to me that if you look at the frescoes in Italy, or you listen to German composers, or look at Dutch painting, that we in Western Christian Europe have done a pretty good job of embracing beauty, truth, and goodness, and also self-sacrifice and sacrifice for love, which is the central image of Christianity. Feuerbach, the philosopher who was not a Christian, did not like Christians at all, said that you can sort of tell what a culture's all about from its religion's kind of central symbol. Ours is Christ on the cross, dying for someone you love. It's Tristan and Isolde. It's all the things that we think are most noble. It's sending people to war to die for their country. All of those values, all those things we love, rest on the image of Christ on the cross. We are good only because we have learned goodness from Christianity. And we can insist in a prideful way that, no, I'm good because I made myself good, because I got there through reason. All right, mate. Just look at the societies that Christians build, and you tell me where you want to live. Is it Abu Dhabi? Is it the Congo? Is it Sparta? Or is it Western Europe, maybe 50 years ago? I know where I'd rather be.
Einstein said it like this: the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is comprehensibility. So the idea here is that you're going to have to posit some kind of mind in order to posit some kind of purpose, that there has to be a design in order for there to be meaning. There is no such thing as meaning to this life if there is not a person who created ultimate meaning. Now, we can try to find arbitrary meaning in our daily tasks in life, but there is no ultimate meaning that we all share in this life. And without that, I'm not sure that we hold together as a society. One of the things that truly brings a society together, and this brings us back to the whole conversation about Christianity in society, one of the things that holds us together as a society is shared morality. That shared morality is the thing that we can share in common. Belief in the dignity of the individual, the intrinsic value of the individual, even the brotherhood of mankind. But the problem is that secular humanism doesn't give you any of those things. You know what does? Christianity does. So if Christianity has actually been the moral glue that has held our society together and the reason that we're fraying at the edges right now as more and more people flee Christianity, then the real question is Christian nationalism really a problem? Let me give you kind of an example. It's often stated that on November 27, 1095, Pope Urban II's speech at the Council of Clermont started the Crusades. You can see that from the text of the speech, it would be more accurate to say that the Crusades were started by the Muslims many years before, and that Urban's appeal was nothing more than a call for Christians to respond to a world that was tearing the world apart. Urban said this: "Some of the Christians they have carried away as slaves. Others they have put to death. The churches they have either destroyed or turned into mosques. They have desecrated and overthrown the altars. They circumcise Christians and pour their blood from that circumcision on the altars and baptismal fonts. Some they kill in a horrible way by cutting open their abdomen, taking out a part of their entrails, tying it to a stake, and then beat them and compel them to walk until all their entrails are drawn out and fall onto the ground." Now there's Urban talking about what Muslims are doing to Christians at the time, and I know what you're thinking. That peaceful religion doesn't sound so peaceful, and you should know this: it isn't. Much like the call of Urban long ago, today Christians are facing a battle that is similar, in at least similar, not in violence, but similar in need of a response. The battle we face today is not physical, but rather ideological. Much like in that day, Christians were hesitant to fight. They had to be convinced by Urban to do so, but the woke neo-Marxists of today have overplayed their hand. In the past, they'd been mostly unopposed, and they thought that they could get away with murder, literally, and it finally caught up to the attention of Christians. Marxists shoved their DEI down the throat of everyone, trying to racialize everything, even airline travel.
I have never seen a black woman fly a plane.
It wasn't enough for them to destroy the definition of marriage. They wanted to parade naked down the street every June for the kids to enjoy. They wanted fat men in dresses twerking in public libraries for the kiddos, and they wanted to march children into gender clinics and castrate them, all while public intellectuals like Neil deGrasse Tyson try to convince us that this is logical.
Why are we doing this?
Because people are mostly boys and girls?
But why split them entering a school building?
Because they pee differently? Jesus Christ, I have to explain this?
No.
Christians who are mostly kind and generally weak people were fine sitting back, going to church and praying in their closets. But when gross injustice is taking place in our country, by that same scripture that calls us to pray in our closet, it also calls us to speak out and to change the world for the better. So if that's what Christian nationalism is, then label me that. But you were probably going to do that anyway, regardless of what I say, and that's something you'll have to look down deep in your soul and see if that sounds right to you. I would rather think that it's a better use of your time to consider the value and the virtue of Christian scripture on society. I suspect that that will be much more fruitful. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and go with God.